So, welcome to CSIS, where we are on the bleeding edge of technology, evidently, talking about what's next in Uzbekistan, and I think perhaps the region a bit more broadly in the wake of Islam Karimov having ended his tenure as Schrodinger's dictator and being officially declared dead. So before we start, just administrative announcement. I'm Olga Uliker. I direct the Russia and Eurasia program here at CSIS. In case of emergency, please look to me to point out what we should be doing, but generally exits behind you. And there's also exits either way. For some reason, that's blocked. I think we have a fantastic panel, which spans time zones, which is always very exciting. But you know, I was looking at this, how do I introduce these people? Well, foremost expert on Central Asia, yeah, one of the people that you really want to be listening to on Central Asia. Really, everybody on this panel is at the top of my list of who I want to hear from when anything happens in this part of the world. We have on the screen behind me, Alisher Siddiqov, the director of the Radio Free. Oh, and first of all, yeah, before I do this, this is not simply a CSIS event. This is jointly put on with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and with the Central Asia program at George Washington University. So huge thanks to both of these institutions for their support and collaboration in putting this together. And not surprisingly then, the two folks we've got remotely represent Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We initially thought about flying them out, but they've been a bit busy. So Alisher Siddiqov directs the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Uzbek service, and has been working on using digital platforms in the closed societies of the region. He has been reporting on Uzbekistan for many years. He was Journalist of the Year of Reporters Without Borders, Stockholm in 2005. Bruce Pannier has also been following this region for as long as any of us. He joined RFERL in 1997. Before that was with the Open Media Research Institute in Prague. And he has done a lot of work at the small-scale regional level in this part of the world. Here in Washington, we have Eric McGlinchey, Associate Professor at the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs at George Mason University. He has written extensively on the internal dynamics in Uzbekistan and its neighbors. And his current book is looking at the international litigation of Central Asian property. Before that, he has written about politics and Islam in Central Asia. And of course, Sebastian Peyruz, who is a Research Professor of International Affairs at Central Asian Program at George Washington. And again, yeah, I mean, I feel like I keep saying one of the foremost experts on the region, but he has, I mean, if you follow this region at all, you have been reading Sebastian. And I think what we're going to do today is we're going to start with Alisher and Bruce talking a bit about what the latest news is, what we might have missed here in Washington, and providing their commentary. Then I'm going to come back here to Washington for some thoughts. And my goal is actually to make this more of a conversation. We're faced with an evolving and unpredictable situation. You know, most of us have given up on predicting a long time ago and are aiming simply to bound the possibilities and think a little bit about how they might evolve. So, and I think to a large extent we do that best by talking amongst ourselves. So what I really want to do is have a conversation. But in order to have a conversation, I need to stop talking. So I'm going to ask Alisher to go first and give us an overview of how he sees things right now. Over to you.
Let me start from the latest news. So the latest news is that they're holding huge Khilaf ceremonies around the country. So these ceremonies are sponsored by businessmen and state workers. So this is one thing. Also, we're focusing on his gravesite at this point, because when they were burying Karimov, in that ancient cemetery, they destroyed dozens of other graves. So we're talking to the owners of the other graves. Yeah, this is like all what's going on. On the bigger thing, tomorrow the Senate will hold joint session, and they will announce who will they will announce the constitutional kind of a president of the country, meaning we assume they will announce that the presidency will be taken over by Nigmatullah Yildaşev, previously less known figure, and we just hope it will be like in the constitutional way. So then we know that the person in charge is Prime Minister Shavkat Mirziyoyev. It was expected, it was anticipated. There is nothing unexpected about it. So he was appointed as a head of the funeral commission. And for those who are familiar with the Soviet Union, the head of funeral commission is usually a successor. A guy who buries the previous one is the next one. This is how we read it. So all the time, so this guy is shaking hands of the guests. The first, whoever comes, they read the message very well. You know, the first man they meet at the airport, that's the guy in charge. This is how things work in our part of the world. So this is like in Godfather, yeah. Whoever comes first and offers you, so this is the guy. So Mirziyoyev is pretty much in charge. One thing that happened, so everybody's talking about power transition, but we see it as a power sharing at this point, because we will talk about transition maybe in 6 months' time. But at this point, we look at it as a sharing. You know, the power in Uzbekistan was held by a small group of people. It's like Putin's Ozira cooperative, if you want, cooperative Ozira. But it's in its own way. Let's say those who were surrounded Karimov. Those who were around Karimov for so many years without unchanged, those people are known. This is first of all Zelim Khan Haydarov. This is his chief of staff, Grey Cardinal, if you will. Then Rustam Inoyatov, the chairman of the National Security Service, former KGB, very influential person, if not the most influential person, even when Karimov was alive. Rustam Azimov, a person in charge of banking, finance, and investments. And our beloved person, Mirziyoyev. Yeah, so a guy who runs this sector, what they say, primarily agricultural sectors, and runs all the problems. So he knows everything from within. So he used to be a hammer of Karimov in every big kind of in his reforms, in a way. So buildings, forcing teachers out to pick cotton, students. So all this handled by building roads, schools, destroying roads, rebuilding schools. So this is all what Mirziyoyev is very much professional doing. So this is kind of a pool. There are a couple of other people. They're not so important to focus on them, but this pool. Okay, there is one other person, Abdulaziz Komilov, who is the foreign minister. He's also in this team at this point. So if you take a look on this funeral commission, basically you will see the whole pool there. So in a very clear way. You just need to throw out of this list, Senate chief and parliament chief. So these are two people you can put in the end of that list. That's absolutely nonsense. So otherwise, all the other people are very powerful. So they will, at this point, what would happen? Of course, Rustam Inayatov, the chairman of the National Security Service, is kind of a grandfather, of all this, of all scenarios. He holds all these keys, but gradually they will become a masters, like in their own kind of sectors, because with Karimov in power, they were kind of were so much accountable to Karimov in every kind of work they want to do. So here they kind of feel free. So Rustam Azimov will be free, will gain more freedom in running economy and finance. So this is our reading. Security will be again under Inayatov. Then probably foreign policy will be more under Abdulaziz Komilov. So kind of he will have more, let's say, role to play now. So this is at this point we're watching how the power is being split, distributed between the power already distributed, but they will gain more independence, more freedom in the capacities. So then we expect, again, according to Constitution, elections in 3 months' time, which will coincide with Christmas and or Obama's elections. With the American election, with American elections. And nobody will notice what happened in Uzbekistan, and everybody will come back in the end of January to learn who is the new leader of Uzbekistan. So this is how they used to deal with this political thing. Everything is good, planned, according to plan. There's no big chess game. We read it like an open book without, you don't. Uzbekistan is not a detective, like it's not a fiction. It's very clean, kind of consistent sort of scenarios, consistent. They're very kind of consistent in what they do and what they claim. So they talk very little and do everything, all what they do one after another. So this is like a very short-term kind of scenario. Then we assume when Mr. Mirziyoyev will become a president, because he's the closest guy for that, for presidency. Then he will start eliminating, gradually changing this core team and, allowing his own team to grow. But up until half a year, I don't see a big kind of change in that country.
Thank you. Bruce.
Well, obviously, this is a big moment. We've been wondering about this for a long time. What happens when the first president actually goes? How does the transition of power look? Also, how is this going to affect the region, too? For 25 years, we're used to the same guy, and that's especially true of the neighbors. So it looks like the power transition, as far as we can tell so far, and as Alisher explained, has gone fairly smoothly. We knew it was going to be a lot of behind the door stuff. It has been. They seem to have settled on having Mirziyoyev as being the heir apparent anyway. At least we can tell that from the meetings he's held. He met with Medvedev on the day of Karimov's funeral. He met with Putin when Putin came to town. Besides organizing the funeral, so that's fairly sure that he's going to be there. But of course, it's going to be fascinating to see now what happens when they have a second president in the country, and is there any chance that these policies that we've become accustomed to over the last 25 years are going to change? I would tend to say not, and we'll probably get into that in the Q&A period. But this is also a big period for the neighbors too, because they also knew what Karimov was all about, as I mentioned. And we have to remember that in every one of the neighboring states in Central Asia, they have a significant Uzbek population too. So this is something that they have to take into consideration with the new leader, if he should be someone who's very nationalist, and this is a problem. On the other hand, the new president doesn't seem to be capable of keeping the country stable. This creates another problem, because if there is a refugee situation, you would expect them to go in every direction in Central Asia and into the neighboring countries. And of course, this creates internal problems for Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan also. Looking down the line, of course, we'll get into what this could mean for foreign policy and everything. But I think, I would agree with Ali Shir that I don't think we're going to see any significant change. These people have not been allowed very much creativity for years and years. I suppose you could say in a lot of ways, this is the first time we're actually going to see what the Uzbek government can do, as opposed to seeing what Islam Karimov does. So in the days to come, post-election anyway, when they hold that, we'll probably get our first chance to get a good look at any shift. And I would suggest again that there are going to be slight policy changes, nothing incredibly significant in the early days. Without a doubt, they'll want to show that they're stable. They'll want to show that they're holding the course, which for a lot of people will work. On the ground at the moment, Ali Shir gave you some news. I've been looking at some of the other stuff that they've been putting in newspapers and on the radio and stuff there, and it's really just business as usual, which also indicates that the power transfer has been fairly successful. And today's news was the textile fair opening in Tashkent, and the mundane things that go day to day with in life. I wouldn't expect them to have any sensational news. They haven't for all these years, but it does indicate that someone at the top is trying to just keep things going as they have been going. Tomorrow will be something of a big day, I suppose, to see if they actually confer the chairman of the Senate as the interim leader of the country, and if they name an election date, which I would expect will probably come after that too. The people of Uzbekistan are probably a little worried because once again, the president, the only president they've known for all these years of independence is gone. Something's going to have to happen. For once, there's actually something of a choice here that's being offered to them. At the same time, I think expectations are low that this is going to make a real big difference in their lives. There's not much chance. The government's facing huge economic problems at the moment. Of course, they're lagging far behind in anything that looks like democratic reform. And I don't see that they'll make any progress on these kind of things at all. In fact, if anything, I would imagine in the coming days, I know a lot of people think in the opposition, you see these statements from outside the country, Muhammad Salih, other people saying that, yes, I would come back if I could and run an election. So that's probably exactly the opposite of anything that the government would consider. And in fact, I think that they will want to make sure they will clamp down more so than ever on any hint of discontent or dissatisfaction in the country, because they're going to want to make it clear that they're not willing to tolerate any kind of opposition at all at this point. It's a sensitive moment for them. And I suppose on another note, it would be worth bringing up the fact that there are some questions about what's going to happen with the family themselves. Lola did show up for the funeral. We know Tatiana Akbarovna was there at the funeral too. Where Gulnara is, we're not exactly sure, but as I suggested in a recent article, I think that their time is pretty much has gone now. And I don't expect that the family themselves will play any role in a future government, and certainly not in the transition. The question is going to be how many of them are able to even stay in the country, in my opinion. So I'm going to let Eric and Sebastian talk and then get to Q&A, which I'm much better at than making speeches anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I realize it's a little unfair to do this halfway through, but I think one of the things, predicting that the status quo will continue is usually a safe bet, particularly when it looks like it's pretty much stable. But kind of asking the question of how would we know if things were going wrong? So to the extent that Sebastian and Eric can incorporate that into whatever remarks they have, and then maybe we can think about that as we go forward. I mean, I also tend to think that everyone has a very strong incentive to keep this managed and calm. But what are the risks to keeping it managed and calm? Is there really a threat? Is there anything do they have anything to worry about other than their own infighting? So I'm going to Sebastian, then Eric.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So, well, I think that I will agree with what Alisher and Bruce said. I mean, at this stage, it's, somewhat difficult to make predictions of future policy as long as we don't know who will be the next president. But first, the future president will very likely come from the inner circles. And second, again, as Alisher was saying, it's very like Mirziyoyev will very probably be the next one. Sorry. I mean, he's for several reasons. Is that, well, he's with Inayatov, the strongman of the country. Let me remind that, well, he was the first president. He's been the first president since 2003. And he is able to manage a kind of alliance with Inayatov. I mean, together, they have really been holding the reins of power for so many years, so they definitely hold a lot of power in the country. Another thing is that Mirziyoyev is backed by the Kremlin, which, to say the least, never hurts, because, I mean, Russia definitely doesn't want to lose its influence in Central Asia, all the more that it's losing its influence on the western part, I mean, in Ukraine. There are also signs, I think, that show that, well, Mirziyoyev will probably be the next president. The first one, and Alisher mentioned that, and this is definitely not anecdotal, Mirziyoyev organized the funerals, which in a Soviet tradition means a lot. Another thing, I was a little bit surprised, that Putin went to yesterday to Samarkand, so he talked with Mirziyoyev, and Mirziyoyev said, he declared that he vowed to continue building and strengthening the ties with Russia, which is, well, somewhat surprising because, I mean, we see that Mirziyoyev anticipates a little bit his own future in the government, not in the next 3 months, but maybe on a longer term. So what does that mean? Is actually the future of Uzbekistan so unpredictable? Well, again, I will be on the same page with Bruce and Alisher. I mean, I think that very few changes should be expected if really Inayatov, or there's 3 guys, at least Inayatov and Mirziyoyev managed to find an agreement. I mean, they will probably, the extreme authoritarianism in the country would probably be maintained. So I think we could quite imagine a kind of almost status quo in domestic policy, at least. And an important point is that in the Uzbekistan neo-patrimonial regime, meaning that where political and economic circles are strongly interweaved and actually are very often the same, all these high personalities and their circles of support have today acquired really substantial financial interest. And this means that any change in depth through, for example, an economic liberalization or strong economic reforms, or even through more superficial change, for example, through more dialogue with the opposition, would or could challenge their political domination over the country and therefore their financial interest. So again, I really do think that a kind of a Khrushchevian thaw, as we were, by the way, expecting 10 years ago in Turkmenistan, I think that this kind of Khrushchevian thaw in Uzbekistan is very unlikely. Uzbekistan will very probably evolve again, as did Turkmenistan after Niyazov died. What I mean here is that, for example, the new president will probably announce some reforms, maybe to meet by the rhetoric some expectations of the population, because I mean Bruce was saying that the economic crisis is the economic situation is very difficult. The social situation is very difficult. So the population is expecting, in a way, some changes. So he has to partially respond through the narrative to some of the expectations of the population. I'm pretty convinced that these reforms will be totally cosmetic or will remain on the paper, but at least he probably will announce some reforms, and he will hold some elections, which will be probably totally unfair, just to ensure his legitimacy. So I'm not saying that there won't be any change. I mean, I will maybe stop here to let Eric talk, but and we can talk later about that, but most of things will probably remain as they are on the short or middle term.
Great, thank you. Hadn't expected Olya to push us in the direction that she has, but I'll try to address some of the wild cards that you know, how would we know that there's some change going on? So I'll address two wild cards at the end, specifically in response to your query. I'd like to, before that, talk about 5 things, and I'll do them in brief. One, the nature of the Uzbek state. What I see going forward. Next, the nature of Uzbek society going forward. The third thing I'd like to address is Tashkent's relations with Moscow. The fourth thing is Karimov's legacy. And then the fifth thing is the relationship between Uzbekistan and co-ethnics and the surrounding territories, picking up on some of the ideas that Bruce had put on the table. And I'm going to frame these things dichotomously. That is, some of these things I'm going to say there's not going to be any change. You've heard a lot about no change, so I'll continue that theme. But there's also, I think, real possibility for change, particularly in the last 3 items that I mentioned here. And so some variation, and then I'm going to forward the wild cards for Olya's query. You know, I agree with everything that's been said before about continuity with the state. Let me give you a causal reason for why I think this is the case. Stepping back, zooming out a little bit, if you look at where the Uzbek political elite, which also happens to be the Uzbek economic elite, derives its wealth, it derives its wealth from the state. So there's a strong interest among the political elite to maintain the very institution that provides its wellspring of wealth, right? So that is a rational decision, and I think within the rubric of authoritarianism, the political elite are going to continue acting rationally. I would just flag this and contrast this to the Kazakh case. I think we will be having a similar roundtable within the next, I don't know how many years, but soon, about Kazakhstan, and I think the situation in Kazakhstan is very different. In Kazakhstan, there's a lot of wealth outside of the state. There are wealthy people in Kazakhstan who don't owe their wealth to the state, and these independent pockets of wealth are not even pockets, it's pervasive, provides the impetus for real political change. So I think we will be seeing much more of a potential for state discontinuity in the Kazakh case than we do in the Uzbek case. So I think that's an interesting contrast, and then one we should really be paying attention to. As far as society, I know there's been a lot of talk about clans in Uzbekistan and about Islamist fundamentalism or militancy, and I don't think these alarmist claims are justified empirically. And I'll just walk you through more than a couple data points. 2005 Andijan, when we saw the massive uprising, the 2002 bazaar protests in Uzbekistan, the 1991 uprising in Namangan, the 1989 riots in Fergana. We can even go back to the 1892 riots under Tsarist Russia, the cholera riots. When Uzbeks protest, and they do protest, definitely, but they tend to protest very specific things. They protest against policies that they're not happy with. Andijan was a protest about a specific policy that the population in Andijan wasn't happy with. The 2002 bazaar protest was a protest about a specific policy. In 2005, the government dealt with it by repression. In 2002, the government dealt with it by walking back some of the new laws, the tax tariffs that were being imposed at the bazaar. But we see this this pattern consistently throughout Uzbek history. Short protests, they can be large scale, they can be violent, but they haven't been enduring. One, I think we're likely to see this continuity with society, this peaceful society, in part because I don't think it's in the interest of the government to advance at this time any kind of policy that is going to displace the population writ large. And two, even if it were, I think these protests would be short-lived. So here with society, I think we're looking at continuity. Let's get to the more interesting things, the things that may change. Russia. It's been interesting to see the discourse or the verbal gymnastics that Putin went through on his visit, where he described positive relations, cordial relations with Uzbekistan over the past decade. That is a stretch of an interpretation. Relations have not been particularly good with Moscow. Uzbekistan has had no time for the CSTO, for the Eurasian Economic Union. There's nowhere but up, really, that Russia-Uzbek relations could go. And I think there's an incentive on both sides to improve these relations. Those who are struggling for power, to the extent that they are struggling for power in Uzbekistan, can benefit from Russian support, and Russia has an interest for expanding its former empire, its imperial reach in this region. And Uzbekistan's always been one of the holdouts. So I think there is a real impetus on both sides for change. But that said, I don't think Russia's ever going to be able to control Uzbekistan. In fact, Moscow was never able to control Uzbekistan. Even during the Soviet period, it was always the tail that was wagging the dog. So yes, there's a chance for change and greater relationships, improved relationships, but by no means do I want to suggest that Russia is going to be able to direct what's going on in Uzbekistan. It never has really been able to direct on a consistent basis what's been going on in Uzbekistan, even during the Soviet period. Now, I know that's a bit of a extreme statement, but I think there's a lot to suggest that Moscow has always struggled here. Karimov's legacy. Right now, it's been, Alisher, you were talking about all the plov that's being eaten right now. I would not be surprised to see a dismantling of this legacy in the coming months. We saw a dismantling of this legacy in Turkmenistan. In general, with these highly autocratic regimes, once the leader dies, the legacy of the leader tends to dissipate very quickly. This intersects with some of the discussion about Karimov's family. If I were a member of Karimov's family, I would be very nervous indeed right now. And I think we can have, it's not inconsistent to say we're going to have state continuity and at the same time a diminishing of the legacy of the Karimov period over the next 5 years. And I would be surprised if there isn't a marked diminishing of the Karimov legacy. There's a lot that people are dissatisfied with this period, and I think it won't take long for those pictures to begin to disappear behind all the government desks in Tashkent. And then the last of the 5 points are the thing that really has me most worried above all else. I really don't care about Karimov's legacy, to be perfectly honest, and what people think of it in Uzbekistan. What has me most worried is the relationship that Tashkent is going to pursue towards co-ethnics in the neighboring country. And to go back to 2010, walking around Osh Jalalabad in 2010, in June 2010, the one thing that I heard again and again and again was, thank goodness Karimov was in power. What would the situation look like if someone who was more inclined towards intervening on behalf of co-ethnics in southern Kyrgyzstan were in power? What would the situation have looked like? And I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination to imagine this kind of leader coming to control in Tashkent. We'd still see regime continuity. The only thing that would be different would be someone who would be much more inclined to intervene on the behalf of Uzbeks elsewhere when we see things like the 2010 riots in southern Kyrgyzstan. And I think that's a possibility, and that could fundamentally alter power relationships in Central Asia. And I think that's something we really have to be careful to watch. As far as the wild cards, Oyo was saying, well, how would we know? What are some of the signposts that we'd look for? I was very interested in Alisher's comments about the collective leadership right now. Collective leadership often is less stable than single man leadership. And so I would watch very carefully what's going on there. The other thing that I watch very carefully is to what extent does the presidential party persist with the next president? So much of the logic of Karimov's autocratic rule was a logic of basically, it was a Vegas logic. If you are a member of the political elite, if you're a member of the presidential party, there's thousands and thousands of people who are members of this party. Your chance of pushing against this system and actually surviving is very low. But if this party fragments, if we have competing allegiances, and we talked about the different ministries having their own institutional backing, and then you could see people's cost calculation of internal protest changing. I'm not saying it's going to happen. In fact, I'd be surprised if it does happen. But this is a critical juncture where the possibility of this massive party and the disincentives that such a massive party has for internal challenging of the regime, that could fall apart. And if that does fall apart, and if we do see different power centers emerging, then the possibility for some kind of internal struggle goes up. Again, I don't think this is likely, but I think it's something that we want to watch for. And then the last thing, and this is a real wild card, and I want to phrase this very carefully because I don't want this to be interpreted in the wrong way. If you look at the people in Uzbekistan that have large followings, and I mean real large followings, not followings based on patronage rule or corruption or intimidation, but actually people that have real legitimacy. These are the charismatic Islamic elite. These are the religious leaders. They are not radical. I want to stress, they are not radical, they're not Islamist, they're not militant, but they do have large followings. This is what 2005 in Andijan was all about. And so I think there is some potential for people to begin to gravitate more and more towards around these leaders. This, I don't think, is going to pose a direct challenge to the regime. In fact, this never posed a direct challenge to the regime. The regime interpreted this in the Andijan case as a challenge, people turning to these charismatic Islamic elite as a challenge. It's not really a challenge, but I do think there is a potential for decentralization of some of the kind of social welfare functions of the state around the mosque. And frankly, that might not be a bad thing in Uzbekistan because the state is not capable of providing this social welfare needs, whereas some of these mosques are able. So I think that might happen, and I think that could lead to some decentralization of power away from Tashkent. But again, that's a wild card. That's kind of trying to meet this scenario, and not terribly likely, I don't think.
Thank you. So I think this has been there's a lot of agreement. I'm very struck. We've spent 25 years worrying about succession in Central Asia, instability in Central Asia. And instability in Central Asia has included one pretty bad civil war very early on, some consistent ups and downs in Kyrgyzstan, and at this point, what looks like two very calm dictatorial successions. So, I think betting on stability is usually the smart bet, right? But I do think we've identified a few interesting things to watch. I think the Moscow piece that Eric and a few others have brought out it's important to push on. Because in the past, Uzbekistan under Karimov has sought to keep Moscow out of the region because Uzbekistan sought a leading role for itself in the region, right? But the way to get that wasn't just keeping Moscow out, it was trying to pull the United States in. It's very unlikely that the United States is going to get pulled in going forward. Of course, very unlikely the United States was going to get pulled in going forward on September 10th, 2001 either. So, never say never, and certainly never write something and publish it. But if you have a new leader who is at least somewhat beholden to Moscow because he's concerned about his ability to galvanize power, to kind of fight everybody else off, how much does this person owe Moscow going forward? My guess is pretty soon not that much, but I also think Vladimir Putin knows that, so if there are favors granted, there are going to be some interesting strings attached. And I think that could change some of the balance in Central Asia to some extent. And also kind of to follow up and also to push back Talasher, this question of if you have this intermediate period where it's condominium rule, and where people have a bit more authority over the things that they're responsible for. We have an echo.
Yeah.
Okay. If that's what happens, how much is anybody going to be willing to try to do until power is consolidated? I mean, does it matter that they have more responsibility if they're nervous about taking any action? What I want to do is do a really quick round of going back around to everybody to respond to anything anybody else has said, including me, and then we'll turn it back for questions. So, Alisher.
Yeah, again, I'm very much agree with everything what Eric said, very good logical sequence. So in Uzbekistan case, we probably, you have like math books where you know the result, but so you can open the end of the book and see the result, but you don't know exactly how to solve this kind of what to put, what the solution like, in reality is. So we know that Mirziyoyev will come to power. We know that nothing will change in a bigger kind of sense. Yeah. So the Russian politics may change a little bit. Again, Russia is economically weak. Mirziyoyev, and whoever comes to power in Uzbekistan, they need someone who will come with investments, for the oil and gas, they need it. And Russia, whatever Russia could do, they already did it in Uzbekistan. So Russia wants to drag Uzbekistan into their kind of a military and political alliances, CSTO, Eurasia Union, custom union. They want to do that with Uzbekistan, but Uzbekistan is like too big, for Russia to swallow at this point, So Uzbeks already inundated Russian labor market, so they want to get rid of them because of their own economic problems. So opening with Uzbekistan may be, kind of a not very good idea for Moscow. What Mirziyoyev can do, he can promise some good additional contracts, oil and gas. But again, that already done by Karimov. Karimov did nothing wrong, did nothing bad to really to make Moscow mad at him. They were very stable. It's just kind of. Maybe he was able to put his own agenda on the table, not joining these political alliances. And once again, in Uzbekistan, the mood is like to continue Karimov's foreign policy. They already pronounced it several times that Uzbekistan will continue the policy. So they building a cult of personality of Karimov at this point. I don't know how it will change. I guess it can change in a very fast, dramatically. But Karimov is gaining a cult of personality post-mortem. He was the one who was kind of opposing this during his lifetime. He never allowed any street to be named after him. Never allowed to be named, any statue for himself. So now this kind of open for public. So now they are writing songs, music, poems, thinking about statues, where to put it. They think they reassessing his great policy. So, and let's not forget that Uzbekistan again lives in the ideology of peace. So for the past 5-6 years, Karimov was able to push this ideology, which was very easily absorbed by the society. So peace, peace, peace. So that like generally exchanging peace for everything. There's no argument that you couldn't put to Uzbeks at this point. You ask human rights, they'll say peace. You tell them economic reforms, they will tell peace. So absolutely one answer for every question, for all questions, So, and in this situation, I agree with Eric They will be very rational, even with their relations with Moscow, with their relations with America. So they will keep selling this peace, and it's very kind of a dear thing for Uzbeks at this point. Those who cry in Uzbekistan, the only thing they carry is a peace. Care about. So Mirziyoyev there is like people say it's good that Mirziyoyev will come to power because he is the guy who knows everything. He cannot hide behind the notion that our leader does not know simply, as Karimov's, past 10 years legacy. So people, if you ask people, the only response would be, if only Karimov would know about it, he would change it. He would look at it, but he just doesn't know about it. And he was, again, like a god creature, knowing nothing, and having his representative on earth like Mirziyoyev. So, and now Mirziyoyev cannot sell it. So he knows everything. He walks and he knows what's going on with the economy, where money come from. So, this is like very interesting points, I think, to make. And again, what future will hold under Mirziyoyev? Karimov had set the bar pretty high in terms of corruption, human rights violations, and all other things. So you have to be very talented to hit that bar, and Mirziyoyev is a very talented person. So he can do it, we have all our trust in him. So that's basically it. And if there are any questions, we're ready to answer any of those.
Bruce, do you have anything you want to?
On the Russia angle a little bit here is that I think that all throughout Karimov's rule in Uzbekistan that he himself was the major obstacle to any more Russian influence. He really didn't, he did see Uzbekistan as being the regional policeman, certainly at the start, and I think all throughout his life after independence he thought that would be true. So he wanted to keep Russia somewhat at arm's length. The people that are now at the top, and specifically Mirziyoyev and also Inayatov, seem to have a different view of what relations with Russia might be. And Inayatov, for instance, he is a former KGB guy, and he got his career started in the 70s. So no matter what Russian Uzbek ties look like, KGB and SNB or FSB SNB ties were always very, very solid. Uzbek dissidents that fled to Russia were picked up off the streets either by SNB agents or by the FSB, only to reappear in Uzbek courtrooms or jails later. And that was consistent throughout Uzbekistan's independence. So we can say that the security services don't have any problems communicating with each other, which really isn't much of a surprise since Inayatov is probably talking to the same people he knew when he was, part of the KGB during the Soviet era. He's one of the insider guys. And to keep on Inayatov for a moment, since we were talking about things that might crack and show that the government isn't totally all together. Inayatov is 72 years old. He's a very large man, overweight. You hear different stories about his health too, and we've heard these stories about Central Asian leaders' health for so long that you practically can't take them seriously. But the fact that he is 72 seems to indicate that sometime in the not too distant future, he's going to depart. And assuming, as so many people say, that he is actually the power, the Grey Cardinal of Uzbekistan, that means we're going to have another power vacuum, potentially much more significant vacuum opening up than the death of the president himself. How they're going to fill that is going to be a question, and we've compared Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan. I would also point out that when it was safe and possible, one of Berdimuhamedov's first moves was to replace his security chief, Recepov, who was seen as the Grey Cardinal in Turkmenistan. So, near term, I don't see any cracks in the government showing up, but given Inayatov's age, given the power that he holds, he might end up being somebody that Mirziyoyev or whoever comes to power would consider being worth removing, and that could cause some problems in the system. Even if he's successfully removed, who do you move in at that point, and what does that do to the balance of power among the elites in the government?
Great. Eric, Sebastian, either of you have additional?
Just one thing that I'd say is I think it's curious that we haven't discussed China and Beijing's policy, so I agree with the likelihood of improved relations with Moscow, and I take Bruce's point that actually relations between the internal intelligence services have always been pretty good. I think that's an important point to underscore. I'd be curious to see what happens with Beijing. In 2005, Beijing came to Tashkent's assistance after Andijan with a fairly largeable and favorable loan. Beijing has always tried to distance itself from political aspects of engagement with neighboring countries. But there does come a point when you have to ask, when a country's economic presence is so large, does its political presence by default begin to shape the way things are happening in the country? And I think Uzbekistan, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but as far as the OBAR, One Belt, One Road, and recent investments, Uzbekistan, I believe, is the largest recipient, or at least pledged recipient, of Chinese investment over the next 3 or 4 years, and it's considerable. So that's another country to watch. I think, Oya, your point about the United States and that it's unlikely to see any significant improvement of relations, I think that's well taken. So if we're looking at the big powers, the United States, I think, is a very distant third, but one I definitely think should be on the table and within the discussion here is Beijing, particularly given its outsized economic influence in Uzbekistan.
Well, actually, to go on with the role of Russia and to go forward about the role of China, I mean, I really think that Russia has a card to play in terms of getting more influence right now. So for among other 2 points. The first one, again, I mean, is the rise of the influence of China in Uzbekistan, which has been especially quick these last 2 years. I mean, 2015, we know that the trade turnover between China and Uzbekistan has been higher than the trade turnover between Russia and Uzbekistan. So, and China has really now become the largest source of direct investment in Uzbekistan. So what does that mean? Again, of course, Uzbekistan will continue to develop its relation with China because it has no choice. But the growing role of China, like anywhere else in Central Asia and like actually anywhere else in the world, for example, like in Africa, provokes more and more concern, and we know, and I guess, well, the government of Uzbekistan will be aware of that when you talk to people on the street. And you really feel a kind of not systematically, but a growing xenophobic feeling among people. So what does that mean? It means that Uzbekistan might try to find more balance, even if it still cooperates with China. Russia is obviously a partner to balance a little bit its economic relations and the potential political influence of China. And the second point where Russia has a card to play is a question of migrants, I think. I think that's an important question because Karimov was extremely reluctant to acknowledge this issue. I mean, let me remind that, I don't know, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago when Karimov said that migrants were lazy people trying to make easy money. I mean, it was really difficult for him to recognize that and never really negotiated with Russia. We actually know that there are about 2 million migrants, Uzbek migrants in Russia. I mean, these figures have decreased a little bit with the economic crisis. well, according to the figures we have, there are about 1,800,000 Uzbek now in the country. But the next president might want to take that more into consideration, viewing that at a time of economic crisis as a kind of safety valve. And this probably could push a little bit more Uzbekistan to be more to negotiate more with Russia through, for example, the Eurasian Economic Union.
Okay, I think that's terrific. I think we're ready to take some questions. So wait for the microphone. Identify yourself with your name and any affiliation you want to lay claim to, and please phrase a question rather than commentary. All right, here in the front.
Yes, I'm David Abramson from the State Department. Karimov did a very effective job of suppressing clan, regional, and other kinds of factions and divisions over increasingly over his 25 plus years. But one thing that I've been thinking about in anticipating what's happened in the last week or so is when there's a period of uncertainty, when there's a succession, there's a tendency to coalesce again with people that you feel more comfortable with, wondering whether your patron, whether your head of your group is going to, the person who's been protecting you is going to survive these changes. And so we've seen what's happened at the top, and I'd love to hear the comments of any or all of the panelists. We have this election, possibly it'll be in 3 months' time, if not before. I've heard Alisher mentioned a 6-month transition period. But what happens when we start seeing people being replaced just below that? And perhaps the most striking example of this would be if the NSS chief Inayatov himself is replaced. How effective can this collective leadership be in consensually agreeing on who's going to replace these extremely powerful people as they move forward? And this is also in response to Olga's question about the risks, because once that starts happening, they start fighting over who's going to be replacing each of these people.
I'm going to take 2 more questions and then go back to the panel. So we've got, why don't we just take the 2 right next to each other there? Yeah, they can fight over who goes first.
Umed Partov, PhD student in conflict analysis at George Mason University. So my question is, how do you see the tribal factor playing in this political vacuum, given that all those people who were close to Karimov are from different regions? Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sufyan Zhemukhov, George Washington University. You indicated that Mirziyoyev was former KGB, and he is the most likely person to come to power. So can we compare him to Putin? And can we, if we look at the trajectory of Russia, and we see how Putin tries to enhance this anti-Western propaganda, he up to today claimed about 30,000 Russians as foreign agents. So can we see that Uzbekistan would be likely, the new leadership of Uzbekistan would be likely to exploit anti-Western, anti-American sentiments in the society. Thank you.
Great. So let's go with the folks in Prague first, and then come back to Washington.
Okay, regarding the last question, Mirziyoyev was not mentioned as KGB. He was never KGB. It's rather, you mean Inoyatov in this case. So I would sort of completely disregard this one. But however, I wouldn't completely disregard this one because there could be an element of surprise from Inoyatov's side. The card could, there are claims that Inoyatov might choose from one of his deputies. In this case, they're talking about Shuhrat Gulamov, very powerful guy, and this could not be disregarded as well. I mean, this kind of a scenario when where a kind of security person comes to power is also there. But we just feel it's kind of very unlikely. However, it's the risk is there, and we know that there were other deputies of Inoyatov, such as Hayat Sharafhojayev, and so very powerful guy, the guy who actually put Gulnara in jail. So that guy, according to our sources, had such ambitions of presidency. But however, this guy himself was dismissed, and his own brother is in jail now. So for corruption and financial embezzlement charges. On tribal factor, this is and Karimov appointing from his own region. This is also not true. Tashkent is in a way a melting pot where you have a wide representation of officials from all the regions. There's no kind of segregation in this part. I would even completely throw out this idea of any tribal factor in Uzbekistan. This is more like, the people in power now are connected all with each other. So they are for 25 years. There's plenty of time to have joint economic interests and joint family interests. So if you go back to any of those and just check their kids, their nephews, you will find they all married each other. They have joint grandchildren. So this is one big clan in a way, one big tribe. Yeah. So this is what we see at this moment. On the first question regarding what happens when the power, I think that's partially the answer for the first question. When the moment when it will be time to the replacement comes. So again, it will be very smooth replacement. Again, they will not go into any extreme of jailing each other. So they don't want to have war between each other because that would affect all of them. So very rational approach at this point. Once again, we're not talking about some revolution. We're not talking about. We're talking about the same regime, the same system. And there's no question and no talks about the system change. So that should be, I think, very clear.
I'll pick it up there and go back the other direction. As far as replacement, I would agree with Alishir that they're going to be very careful about who gets replaced in what areas. And I would, at this point, again, bring up Andijan in 2005. There has been some work and some research done that suggests that problem all started because they changed the leadership in Andijan several months, a year or something before the violence broke out there. And when the new leadership came in, it shifted the patronage system. And the new leadership had their own people who wanted to hand or parts of those businesses too. And that's what deprived ultimately the people who ended up in jail of their businesses. And that led to the protests to start with. So the potential is there, but the government's seen it happen before, where if you put in new leadership on a regional or more district, well, not even district, but really provincial, say, level, you have to watch what they're doing, because some of their moves can be really unpopular. And as I said, in the case of Andijan, it probably was the root cause of what happened there. The clan factor. Well, of course, the first thing we got to point out is that the word clan in English doesn't really give you the full meaning of what it means in Uzbekistan. It's family, it's region, but it's core economic interests, that are expressed regionally. Different areas have control over different parts of the economy. So yeah, of course, you would think that if someone takes control of somebody else's section of the economy, basically depriving them of their source of income, that would be a problem. But again, Karimov was fairly adept at balancing these kind of interests. The new leadership will want to do the same without a doubt, just to make sure that they keep everyone happy. I don't think it was even a case of, Karimov's balance system was really a carrot and stick approach. There was some, you could be punished for going over the line, but you could be rewarded for behaving the way the president wanted you to. And that seemed to be an effective way of keeping things in check all the way around. I would expect, again, they would try to imitate that to the greatest extent possible. One of the reasons that Mirziyoyev might be the front runner for president too, is the fact that he's considered from the Samarkand clan, as Karimov was considered from the Samarkand clan. Now they know that worked, to have the president be from the Samarkand clan and other people from other regions of the country occupying power posts within the government too. So they might just feel that this is the best way to keep things as close to as they were. And that would be another point in Mirziyoyev's favor. Now, would the government exploit anti-Western sentiment? I would hazard to say that there's not that much Western influence on the ground in Uzbekistan right now to exploit. You can throw that out there without a doubt. Oh, it's the evil West and stuff, but there's not. People will look around and see that there's not a whole lot of Western presence there anymore. Most of it's gone, in the 2 years after Andijan. So that one might not work as well. I mentioned nationalism. Now, this is a cheap way to get popular support. I would be more concerned, Eric mentioned Kyrgyzstan, and I would be more concerned if I was the Kyrgyz government or Tajik government, or even, for that fact, the Turkmen government, because the Turkmen had some fairly repressive policies against their Uzbek population before Berdi Mukhomedov came in under Niyazov. This is something that people would relate to much more closely on the ground in Uzbekistan. To bring up these problems from days gone by now, as opposed to trying to pin problems on the West and get some kind of political capital out of that. Because, like I said, there's really not that much of a Western presence anymore. I don't think that would play out as well as something more local, personally.
Thanks. Here at this end, any additions?
Just briefly to David's point, and I guess that intersects with the tribal question as well. I think a lot of research suggests that identity tends to follow economic linkages, and so the identities can be fluid, and so I wouldn't necessarily focus on clan or region or even religion for that matter, but I would focus more broadly on patron-client relationships. And to the extent that were these to be disrupted, then I think the scenario that you're suggesting is one that we should pay attention to. And I think we have a few data points that suggest this. One is Andijan, as Bruce mentioned, although my interpretation of Andijan is a little bit different than yours. My thought with Andijan was that Abidov, the governor, had more or less gotten too close to the Muslim businessmen, and that sparked the intervention. Not that there was a shakeup in the leadership before, which sparked the intervention. But your general point about patronage, I think, I think that's right. So Andijan would suggest that to the extent that these patron-client relationships get disrupted, and here this was the business leaders underneath the cover of Abidov, it was disruptive. That I think conforms conforms to your hypothesis to a little bit. And another one would be 2010 Kyrgyzstan. Immediately after the provisional government took power, they changed they tried to change, in fact, they did change the leadership in southern Kyrgyzstan. And I think that was probably the cause of a lot of the instability that we saw. I think in retrospect, the Atambayeva government would say that was probably a mistake. So actually, again, if we go back to Gorbachev and Gorbachev's taking away the Communist Party as the leading political organization in the country, and then the subsequent events there where you saw the pushback from the political elite. To the extent that these kinds of patron-client relations get disrupted, this isn't clan, this isn't religion, this isn't region, but patron-client relations, then I think we could see instability. My guess is that the Uzbek government, which has built a very capacious patron-client relationship, understands this and will continue the policy that Karimov has implemented over the past 25 years.
Well, actually, I don't have much to add here, but I agree, David, that Karimov did a very good job to control the clans, and I agree with you, Eric, when you say that we should not focus on region. But I do think that even if clans are controlled, regions remain. What I mean here is that we've seen this last years, for at least 6 or 7 years, and I would say actually since the economic crisis in 2008, that Karimov had been able to send less and less money to the regions. And this definitely threatens the neo-patrimonial regime in Uzbekistan, because we know that more and more governors were worrying and had a kind of growing resentment against the central authorities or against Karimov. And then for the governors, it was more and more difficult to redistribute a part of the money they were receiving to their population to keep these regions quiet. So, this is for me a point which is concerning if the economic crisis goes on in Uzbekistan, if no changes are made by the new government. I must say that I have no idea how the government will manage that. Still, of course, too early to say that. Maybe by, again, encouraging Chinese and Russian investments, which to bring big capitals, because those are really the two only countries which would be able to bring a lot of money in the country and to maintain this system. But this is, of course, just a supposition.
All right, thank you. Let's do one more round of questions. All right.
Hi, Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. We did not speculate about the possibilities of Islamist disruption. What kind, how militant, supported by whom? What kind of responses leading to what kind of outcomes? Thanks.
And actually, I'll add to that, as well as Islamist disruption, I'd say we should also talk about the possibility of a regime trying to use real or imaginary Islamist threats to consolidate power. But let's get a couple more questions. Unless we have no more questions. All right, then let's go to Prague to talk about Islamists.
Hello. Yeah, it is again Yatov's sphere, to fight against Islamists, and they've been fighting with them with imaginary or real. They've been fighting for the past 25 years. They put thousands of people in jail for exercising any idea of Islamist idea. Those who were jailed, they didn't even know they will turn Islamist after 10 years. Yeah, so at that time when they were jailed, they were innocent. Yeah, so but Karimov kind of worked in a more predictive way. So he was jailing everybody who had any idea, any idea that would be not in line with the state way of understanding Islam. Yeah, So people got in jail for having beard, for hijab, for reading some books, for having some audio cassettes. I mean, for different things. So, and for any successor of Karimov, it's very easy because the ground was cleaned to kind of very much, today there is the society, in Uzbekistan has very clear idea about it. So that this is like the most dangerous thing you want to do in Uzbekistan. Yeah. So that's why for the past quarter of century, it's already in the blood of people. Don't mess up with religion, don't do anything. And security services really worked hard, harsh, and yes, we know. Hello? I think we lost the connection.
You're good. Keep going. They just zoomed into you.
So we know that is also true that there are hundreds of Uzbeks who joined ISIL or Islamic groups in Afghanistan, in Pakistan at that time. So we know, but they are kind of mainly not as, Uzbekistan was not a source for those. The source was Russian labor migrants, those who were in Russia already, and they were living in small societies, small groups, searching for identity. So that is kind of disconnected from Uzbekistan in a way. Even the trajectory, how they ended up there, is also kind of through Russia or Turkey, and the militancy in Afghanistan and now in ISIL. It actually serves as a vacuum cleaner, for all these radicals. Like it serves the sucking kind of a place. Really, whoever has this jihadi idea, it's we talk to jihadists. Yeah, as a journalist, it's happened so frequently. They get in touch with us through WhatsApp, Viber. And they never write anything about Uzbekistan or coming back to Uzbekistan or doing anything in Uzbekistan. So they just write about infidel regime of Pakistan or Afghanistan. So they kind of diverted from the idea to do anything in Uzbekistan or to create any problems in Uzbekistan. So yes. Islam is not dead in Uzbekistan. Yes, it has potential if someone will start playing with this, but I think they pretty much realize that it's not kind of a game you want to play at this point. You cannot control when it is out of control.
Yeah, I would just add that I kind of agree with that too. I don't think there's much potential for that breaking out inside Uzbekistan. Some of these groups might think that this is a time to try to up the propaganda and see if they can't get somebody to go along with this kind of stuff. Noah Tucker, for instance, did some outstanding research on this and shown that those Uzbeks, people from Uzbekistan who do join these groups in the Middle East, as Alishir pointed out, have probably gone to Russia. And a lot of the Uzbeks that are present in conflict zones in Syria and Iraq are actually Uzbeks from Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan and not from Uzbekistan. So the recruitment has been very, very low from inside Uzbekistan. Very, very few people have actually decided while living in Uzbekistan to leave the country and try to make their way to Syria and Iraq, at least as far as we know on evidence. Will that stop the government from arresting a lot of people based on them supposedly being Islamic extremists? Absolutely not. I mean, this policy has been working for them for 15 years, even more than that. They've been able to net any even secular political opponents and brand them as Islamic terrorists, potential Islamic terrorists, and throw them in jail. So I'm sure you'll still hear that coming out. Whether these people are really Islamic extremists is a huge question, and chances are they aren't. But I don't see that within Uzbekistan, there's really much there it's hard to get a spark to build into a fire. There's just not, it's not fertile ground for that.
And also, just to add to it, Uzbekistan acts not only on its own territory, yeah? So we know about assassination of Uzbek imams in Turkey. We know about assassination attempts of prominent Uzbek imam in Sweden. So he's in kind of coma now, you know, the guy. So even external preachers are kind of under threat for that matter. And last year, Uzbekistan also organized trips of its own imams in Russian regions. So they were distributing books for labor migrants. So it shows that they want to, they kind of are more or less comfortable with the country, with internal situation. But now they kind of trying to go beyond their own territory and do the work outside. So with all the security agents they distributed, with the checks inside the country, with the real threat to the family members, if anyone will join ISIS, I don't know, the first to suffer would be their own family members. So it's very difficult. It has a lot of consequences. Karimov's regime was very harsh. When we say this is, Inoyatov was behind this, and he's still there. So I think they were really successful in cracking down on that idea, with a lot of human rights violations, I must say.
Either of you want to add?
Well, I don't have much to add to what Alisher and Bruce said, but well, of course, as Alisher said, I mean, there is a potential. I mean, there are some. We know that there are hundreds of fighters, of Central Asian fighters in Syria, or there are some fighters in Afghanistan. So yeah, there is a potential risk. But let's say that and I would like to insist on that, in the worst case scenario, even if some attacks were organized, even if some Islamist groups or individuals could try to use this the current situation after the death of Karimov. I mean, any attacks which is possible would not mean that this would be a destabilization of the country. You can have several attacks without any form of destabilization, and I think that Mirziyoyev and Inoyatov are pretty able to control that.
Eric?
Ariel, I'm glad that you raised the issue of radicalization and militancy. Indeed, there has been radicalization and militancy. I'd say it's been on the part of the government against the Islamic community in Uzbekistan. So I think that's something worth paying attention to. If you look at the literature on Central Asia just prior to the Soviet collapse, there are a lot of people writing about the Soviet Union's soft underbelly, the Muslims of Central Asia, and how they were going to lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Central Asia was, the populations of Central Asia were the ones who least wanted to leave the Soviet Union. So I think it's been, this idea of radical Islam in Central Asia has been around for a long time. We have precious few data points to support it. We do have some disgruntled Uzbeks who, by way of Russia, as Bruce notes and as Sebastian and Alisher have noted, have made it to some flashpoints, but these are more the exception than the rule. And then I'd just like to, Bruce mentioned Noah's work on this issue, and I think Noah's done some really good stuff, and he had a piece that just came out with RFERL the other day, where he talks about an entrepreneur, a guy who had been raising fish on ponds on his property in Uzbekistan, and he was thrown in jail for being a radical extremist, an Islamist. He's Armenian and he's Christian, but he confessed to being a radical Islamist. And the reason Noah writes from his research is he did not want to give the fish, or I'm not quite sure what the term is where you raise fish, but he didn't want to turn that over to the Uzbek government, and the local government wanted to take his resources, and therefore he was labeled as an extremist. It's a very effective tool for getting things the state uses to get things from people.
We are out of time. So I think on that note, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank George Washington University and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty for making this happen. I want to thank technology, and I want to thank all of you for taking part. Thank you. 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 Thank you.